Hello and welcome to Living in the Promised Land. This is your host, Mark Shmueli. I want to first thank Jeff Barsky from Insect Factory for the intro music and Stephanie Buatois, our producer. So today we're going to hit a different topic. We have our guest, Christina Getrich. Christina, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm going to just explain some of it. Christina's got a massive resume, a wealth of experience, has worked on the border, has worked with immigrant communities. She's an anthropologist specializing in mixed immigrant families, meaning families where some folks have citizenship, some folks have green cards, some people might have DACA, some people might have temporary protected status, the whole gamut. And then some people might have no status at all. And some people might even have a removal order for a hearing they didn't show up for 25 years ago. And since that time, they've worked in the United States, they've lived, they raised their families, they've fixed your cars, they've done all kinds of things. And as we saw in Iowa, they might have even been the superintendent of the largest county in the state of Iowa. So these are things we're discovering about people in our midst. And we talk about what it means to be out of status, what it means to not be in immigration status. And we talk about that in juxtaposed against the noise that we hear and we're constantly fed about illegals and why ICE needs to beat the crap out of people and throw them on the ground and smash in their windows. And all these are realities. All these are realities that are going on in our country. And here we are in the middle of it. But, again, for the most part, every single violator of immigration law is a violator of the civil law, which is equal to all of you who did not pay your taxes or underreported or got audited. And so the next time that you want to call somebody an illegal, I expect that you do the same for anybody who has a business, who paid somebody under the table, who didn't report their taxes, who got paid in cash, who paid in cash, all of the things that violate regulations in the United States. And we think about it that way. Now, again, just as we know, nobody likes an insecure community. And if somebody is crossing the border to do harm, you don't need to do the dragnet that's being done right now, and you certainly don't need to vilify an entire population. And so, we know that the idea of this podcast, again, is to have us not only just speak rationally and sanely, but also to defend our communities and to defend people against being attacked for who they are. And that is something that you do not have to understand the Byzantine crazy laws. We're going to talk about some today that drive me crazy and put me to sleep with, Tylenol half the nights of the week, or at least some, as my colleagues and I argue. You don't need to know that to know that discriminating against somebody because of where they come from, who they are, it's not only a non-starter in your own community, but it's a non-starter if we want to have a country that's not what it is right now. So after that lengthy introduction, we have, you won't hear a lot from me, I hope, this time, because we have somebody who can Christina, who can say so much about all of this. Christina quickly has written lots of things, but she's got 2 books out. One is Border Brokers. This was written in 2019, Children of Mexican Immigrants Navigating U.S. Society, Laws, and Politics. And now that's a book that is focused mostly on Tijuana and the borderlands there, right? And then her new one is Everyday Activists, Undocumented Immigrants Quest for Justice and Well-Being, in which she interviewed 30 DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the students we always hear about. And she interviewed them in the Washington, D.C. metro area. Christina is also the Associate Director of the Center for Global Migration at the University of Maryland, and the Director of Graduate Studies for her department. And her work focuses on the health and well-being of mixed families, as we talked about. So, Chrissy, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So our first question here is, yesterday is this you know yesterday there was a decision about DACA that came down from well, it wasn't. DACA is a really crazy bunch of litigation. Texas, essentially, to distill it, Texas sued 6 years ago, um, saying that DACA, meaning where you give deferred action, which is you're not giving citizenship, you're not giving a path to citizenship, you're not giving green cards. That bill died. People wanted to give green cards to these kids. These are young, people who were brought here as children with their parents, who came with their parents to the United States and grew up, but they were not born here. Maybe their siblings were who came after. Maybe they were 6 months old. Maybe they were 3 years old. Their siblings came after. Their siblings may have been born here, hence the mixed families. And you have a situation where they grew up, many of them didn't even know. They knew nowhere else. And they found out later in life when they were applying for jobs after college, wait a minute, or going to college and not getting in-state tuition in some states, but traveling, that they had no status. Like, where's my passport? Where's my birth certificate? It's not a U.S. one. Sometimes people found out that way. And so the DREAM Act was something that was actually spawned by Orrin Hatch, Republican from Utah, John McCain. Everybody wanted it. Everybody wanted it. And then when they had a chance to pass it in 2010, after conservative Democrats were beaten in the South, and they voted, and 3 or 4 conservative Democrats, even when they were voted out of office, voted against it. So, and by then the Republicans, Obama was president. So, and then they had anything he wanted, they didn't. It doesn't matter what he could have. It didn't matter. So, and since that point, the divisions are there's even on something like this, they couldn't get together. Obama, when he ran for re-election, put out this memorandum, which is it's an executive policy, but it's precarious. And then Texas sued because they said, wait a minute, if you're going to give work permits to these people, they're going to get driver's licenses, and that's going to cost the state. You're harming the state. So I went to Judge Hainan, who has a very long decision, which is very interesting, that he wrote, and he kind of agreed, but he said, wait a minute, these kids, this was 2019 or 2020 that he issued this decision. He said, wait a minute, these kids, earlier even, there's so many decisions, but around that time. And he said, but they've relied on it. So as I know it's going to be appealed as it's going through this, they should be able to renew and it should stay in place. Trump administration opposed that. And then yesterday they actually did a brief saying they can renew it. They can renew their DACA. There are no new applications, but they can renew them, and they can get work permits for 2 years everywhere except Texas. Now, for the Trump administration to give immigrants anything except a deportation order these days is monumental in itself. So this is how much favor they have. So tell us about your study and what we'll start off with that. Tell us about your study into the community and what you found.
Sure. So in 2016, I started a research study here in the DC metro region. I had a number of great anthropology undergraduate students. Some of them have now gone on and gotten graduate degrees and are much older now. But we had a great team of researchers. And so we were trying to understand, it was 2016. So at that point, DACA had been in effect for a few years. And we were trying to understand more about kind of the positive gains, from the program. But already it was an election year, right? And so there was already concern about what might happen to DACA. And so, of course, Trump then was elected and initially was not targeting DACA, but that started happening pretty soon, right after he took office. But basically what we started as kind of this case study looking in 2016, eventually it evolved into a 5-year-long project where I followed basically these 30 DACA recipients who are from 13 different countries of origin, some Latin American, but also from Africa and Asian countries of origin, which is a little different than what we hear, the narratives about DACA that we hear mostly in the news. So we started following them first through this Trump era, right, when mental health concerns were particularly acute, right? What's going to happen to me? The DACA rescission attempt in 2017, September 5th, 2017 happened. So a lot of it was trying to understand the impact of it. At that point, I think one important thing to note with DACA recipients now is that they're adults, right? They have careers, they have families, they have, deep roots and communities. And even at that time, a lot of them were kind of transitioning out of college and entering the labor force and entering the adult world, right? So there was a lot of kind of disruption and chaos in that period of their lives. But then I kind of reconnected with folks. I had a community advisory board, so all along the way we met. But I did another round of interviews with folks in 2020 and 2021, deeply in the pandemic. So I had imagined that it was going to be even more acute mental health distress in that round. But what I found was that a lot of them were really doing well. When I caught up with them, they were telling me about, I got into this graduate program or I got married. A lot of them had bought first houses and even moved in extended family members into their houses, right? So even deep in the pandemic, I came to realize that what they were doing was strategically and intentionally focusing on everyday life. And so these were at that point, by and large, not activists. So they weren't participating in movement activities. They were busy adulting, as they said, right? But nonetheless, they were engaged in these actions in everyday life, right? So say, somebody is working as a translator in a hospital setting. And so she's taking the opportunity with the DACA rescission announcement to educate her coworkers about DACA, about immigrant students more broadly, right? So they're acting on some of these moments, these kind of teachable moments, where they're telling people, really teaching people about DACA and about the immigration system broadly, right? So it's more through these everyday actions in their adult lives that they're kind of supporting the movement. Some of them are also doing it through, a lot of people happen to work in service positions, right? So they're social workers, they're educators, they're working in a number of these service realms, and that's where they're applying their energies, right, towards social change. So it was a trajectory of research, a longitudinal study where we followed folks and kind of went with them through these like tempered gains that they experienced initially. I say tempered because they were always concerned about their family members that didn't have status. So it was sort of like, yes, I was able to go to college, but my sibling who was just a little bit too old to qualify for DACA wasn't able to. And so it still people have kind of guilt about what their other family members can't do, right? So it's always tempered. And then in Trump, the first administration, it was a lot of distress and trauma and all of that. But then by kind of the next phase of things, I saw just amazing resilience, creativity, and really showing up for their communities in kind of these unique and novel ways. And so that became kind of the focal point of my analysis and obviously the focal point of the book itself.
And we talk about that is there's no, one of the things I've mentioned here is I had my semester of teaching at University of Maryland where I taught the immigration ethnicity history course, because why wouldn't a lawyer take as their adjunct course a history course where they have to relearn this? But there's a lot of things. But one of the things that I've always been fascinated by traveling around the country, this, as people know, I did an episode a couple months ago from Springfield, Ohio, is how communities change because of immigration to a community or people knowing people. And we talk about the evangelical churches in the South would be gone, many of them, without the influx of people like my clients, or evangelicals from Central America, because native-born U.S. citizens of generations are just less church-going. I mean, that's just the way it is, and so that's one of the things, and also in these communities, and it's sort of, say an act of resistance. It's an act of activism. It's an act of just passively to just be there, because really so many people, you can have your ideology, you can be for immigrant rights, but I think when it really hits people is when it's their families, when it's and they just take down the barrier of understanding who people are. And I think that had a lot to do with, all kinds of movements in this country, is when people realize it's not a them, it's an us. And um and you can't escape the us, and it's not dangerous. And I think that that's it. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that DACA recipients are disproportionately working in the healthcare fields. Was that true?
Yes, and education. So yes, they're working in a lot of these critical areas. Yeah, so they're with the rescission announcement in 2017, they started doing a lot of sort of economic analyses of industries that would be hit or hit to state economies, right? So there, were a lot of focus on kind of their economic contributions. But I think we can see that too, even working within the healthcare system, they're not just filling labor shortages, right, or gaps in the system. What they're bringing is sort of an understanding, I mean, certainly linguistic resources, right, and connecting with their communities, but also an understanding of navigating immigrant life in the United States that extends beyond their community, right? And just sort of even if they're working in the healthcare system and they now have insurance, they were uninsured at some point, and they understand what it looks like to try to figure out the system from within. So it's not just that they're filling these gaps, right? It's what they're contributing and what they're bringing that I think we should focus on too.
Well, and one of the things you've written about, besides in your book, I know you've written articles on this, is people talk about this with African Americans. People talk about it with women. People talk about it about people who are overweight or considered to be overweight, but the discriminatory treatment in the healthcare world, and how that's something that is an issue that the DACA folks have taken on, because they see, they see it in lots of ways. I think with their families, they see the way their parents are treated, and treated both because their English isn't going to be often as good. That they're like most immigrant families, not now, because generationally, it's not a linear push up, but it kind of is for those families, in the sense of like, uh, old school. Like, I want better, like, Eastern European immigrants before, or immigrant. I want this for my kids that's better. And they see they see this treatment, especially in mixed families. And I know, I had an assistant who was from El Salvador. She was born here. She's from a mixed family. She lived with cousins, mixed and all that. As the pandemic started, her parents, like, they didn't stay home. One, they didn't stay home because they didn't get the money. There was none of the money came to them. So for people, none of the money came to them. And two, they didn't stay home because their work didn't stop. They cleaned offices. Construction didn't stop. Like, the work that was done wasn't stopped. Retail, grocery workers bringing things back and forth. It didn't stop. And so, one of the things I know you've written about is these communities and their healthcare and discrimination. So, how do you see DACA, these folks, like, tackling that issue?
Yeah. Well, so there's sort of the matter of discrimination and mistreatment sort of in these medical contexts, right? And so they're good sort of advocates, just as I was explaining, this woman who worked as she worked as in numerous capacities in healthcare system, including as a translator and a nurse, certified nursing assistant, and different things. But some of it is like sort of transmitting knowledge about immigration to her coworkers, but some of it is also helping her patients, her clients navigate these systems. When you look, so that's some of what they're bringing too. And when you look at an area like the DC metro region, you see variable state and local policies as far as their inclusion of immigrants, right? So DC is the most inclusive context where undocumented immigrants can get health care. Maryland has.
We don't want to let that out too much, as somebody thinks he's the emperor of DC right now. We
Well,
don't
yeah.
want to cut that part out,
Yeah.
but that's so true because
Yeah.
for what's called, special immigrant juvenile, their age is, it's complicated, but their age is a little bit lower. And I'll tell people move to Maryland, it might be better. And they'll be like, no, I have a child. I'm in my early 20s. I get all the health care I want in DC. I can go to school. I get daycare. I get, even my friends who are not in that class, who are here, they're like, oh, yeah, I'll move to Maryland when my kid's in school. But preschool's free. Like DC has a web of social services that I wish, our Quisling, I should say I'm on the border, but I was born in DC. My family's been in DC for 120 years. So my mom was raised here. But the Quisling mayor of DC would say, again, positively, like, look, we're doing these great things. DC is actually doing these things regardless of status, which is, wow, those kids are going to grow up the same. So I didn't mean to jump in.
And one of my students is doing research right now and is finding that even under extreme ICE surveillance and enforcement taking place right now, there's still the perception that they're better off in DC, where they have access to care and services, right? So even in this present moment. But then you see, in the DC metro region, people move a lot, right? They move between jurisdictions. So what a lot of these DACA recipients discovered with their families was when they moved to DC to Maryland, they lost their coverage. There's also a program for minors called Care for Kids that's a county-specific program, right? So they moved from one county to another and no longer had their access to care. So DACA recipients sort of grow up learning about these different programs, these different policies that exist in different jurisdictions, right? So then as adults working in the healthcare system, they're really well positioned to help advise patients about how to navigate. You'd like, okay, you live in DC, you can get free HIV, STI testing at this location, right? Whereas in Maryland, you can't, right? So they have a really keen sense of kind of the local geography and the local landscape of policies that they're able to share with folks. And they do it, even those, who work within these systems, they're sharing with their friends and family members too, right? So this information kind of moves through social networks, and that's really important too. So
And
they're
people,
really good kind of translators, like literal translators, but translators of knowledge about programs and policies that are really critical for immigrant communities.
well, and we know, I mean, we're a capitalist society, which makes everything good hard. And so, name it, education, all those things hard. And and we know with healthcare, we're always told you have to push, you have to advocate, you have to jump in. And people are not used to they're used to coming from countries where, I mean, not that it works here. I mean, it's an awful system. Not that, okay, if you just ask, you get it. You just forgot to ask. No, we know that's not true. But they come from places where that's a negative. If you say, or it's neutral, it means nothing. And I mean, I learned that when I spent time in Peru myself, and I would say, well, that's not right. I'll just talk to the manager, and it's like, shit, have a seat. It doesn't matter. Like there's no culture for that, and so with it, and if a doctor walks in, and we know it's like it's kind of very similar. I mean, I have a friend who's English isn't perfect, but and she's Costa Rican, and she works in the healthcare industry. And she actually works at Holy Cross at the college, Montgomery College across from me. And she had a work accident where a big pole hit her, and I went with her to her workman comp lawyer meeting, and the lawyer talked down to her, and she's been in the U.S. since the 90s, and talked down to her, at her. I mean, not that they wouldn't do it to others, but this is sort of the way that it rolls, and people are so easily taken advantage of, and not questions. And so you get, I mean, I see that with my clients. You don't get those kinds of services, and their kids, these DACA kids understand that system, and they understand it, and they're out there advocating, and they don't like the fact that they're separated from their parents, and their parents and again, before you pop off of DACA, because got other things to do, is again, this is part of, tell your liberal friends out there, not you, Chrissy, but everybody out there, tell your liberal friends who adopt the, I always say hero to the show, Chuck Schumer version of opposition where we say, well, we need to control the border, and or better, these kids, these DACA kids are of no, it's not their fault. I mean, now they're in their 30s, so it's ridiculous to talk to them like that. But these DACA kids, it's not their fault that their parents dragged them here illegally, as if they were kidnapped, as if their parents made them run drugs across the border, as if it's not their fault that their dad, left the gun laying around. And it's like, and these kids are like, are you kidding me? You know, it's
I would say too, I'll add to that. I mean, that's, I think a place if we look at state level policy making too, we can see like, so Maryland, for instance, passed a law, a professional licensure law, as other states have done to enable undocumented immigrants to work, to sort of codify their place within some of these critical systems, healthcare, education, social work, right?
Mhm.
So I think we can see the space, even in this federal context, for more inclusionary state and county and even city level policies, right? That promote inclusion for DACA recipients as well as their family members in some cases.
Oh no, and Maryland's done a lot of good things, but saying this is, it's just the infuriating paradigm because you're saying that about their parents, and they're saying, well, wait a minute, they were our heroes for the
Mhm.
most part. I mean,
Yeah.
people have
And they
bad
say,
parents. People have bad. What
a
was
lot
that?
of people will say they're, my parents were the original dreamers, when they were embracing the dreamer label, which most or many have rejected at this point because it sets them apart as being somehow more exceptional than their family members or other immigrants that aren't perceived to be deserving. So,
Or as if they didn't know, as if those parents didn't worry about bringing those kids across that border.
yeah.
About, I mean, it's a level of just it's a level of stupid that has become mainstreamed. And until, these are the paradigms, until we just shatter those,
Mhm.
we can have our band-aids like Maryland does, but we aren't going to have our reality, which is what I think we.
Right, because ultimately, I mean, DACA recipients have been picked up and detained, so
Mhm.
ultimately, any of our DACA recipients, anybody who participated in my study could be picked up, right? Like it's not with the temporary status they have, and frankly, even with permanent residency, it's not protective enough at this point. So,
So what do you see about from the other, just out of curiosity, because I'm saying this because when I was in Springfield, one of the things that struck me, I mean, first of all, I was dressed like this and in Springfield, Ohio, and on a 100-degree day in the summer when it's dead, they were like, okay, who's this guy coming in a suit? Because I was going to town. I court later that day I had to do my video. But anyway, and I went in the coffee shop and there were teenagers there and, working. And then her friends stopped by and all that. And they're like, okay, what's your bit? What are you doing in town? And so I told them, and they're like, oh, that's really cool, and this is what's going on, and how much the town was shattered, how much Springfield, Ohio, as a microcosm, was shattered, and because there's 20,000 Haitians in a town of 60,000, and they're all facing what we saw last year, that they're eating the cats and dogs. That's why I went, because I wanted to see. And that town had skinheads coming through it, bomb threats, arguments in the town. I mean, it was, and of course, they blamed JD Vance because he's local. He was the bomb thrower, but there was, there were no. I mean, pick on them up, but there were no Democrats there to defend them. They were left on their own. But these kids, these high school students were like, we're pissed. We want to stay here, but we can't if it's going to be this atmosphere. We don't see the difference and just cut it out. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that among the student body of like, we don't want to live this way anymore. We don't want to live in a country where this is the blame, or this is the paradigm. And I'm wondering if you're seeing it from the other students.
yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think people have, I mean, especially now, broad concern about their immigrant classmates at every level, right? We see this in like elementary schools and high schools, and certainly on college campus. What are we meant to be? I mean, you see students, back, I can't remember what year, probably around the time of the DACA rescission announcement in 2017, there was a push for the president at the time to declare UMD a sanctuary campus, right? And the president at the time, Lowe, declined to do so on the basis of Prince George's County being a sanctuary county, right? But still symbolically for the students, it meant something. And so, different student organizations banded together to push the administration on it. And it was ultimately, a no. But, the students they mobilize around these things. They care about their immigrant, especially here, on the campus of University of Maryland. We have an incredibly diverse campus. And many students have immigrant family members or are immigrant themselves, right? So there's a lot of, I think broadly, a lot of support, for immigrant students, increasingly also for international students, which I know is another population we're going to talk about, right? But I think it's also, what are the levers that need to be pushed, and what are the things that can be moved, and what can happen, right? How do they apply their energies, right? Because if it's making, certain kinds of demands, then they're going to be disappointed when those changes are not possible. But if there's other things that they can get behind, then that's kind of a different story. But yeah, I would say I see broad support, certainly on my campus.
Well, and that's the thing is, I mean, you and I were talking before. There's things that happen each day that you know we don't follow. I mean, you've got all these classes that teach that do different things. I do this day and night, and so I mean, really not too many nights, mostly days, but I am, and I miss the some of the things. I mean, you were talking, we'll talk about in a minute, like what the immigrant students go through, and I know, and people, and I don't, and again, this is a show where we know. I mean, I say right off, one of the, I mean, I love nature. If it weren't for me living within a mile of I mean, for people that don't know, Washington, D.C. has a national park in the city, and it's within a mile of my house. And which is crazy that's going on. And during the pandemic, if I didn't have that here, I don't know, where my sanity could, like that was right here. And I love nature. Do um, I hate the effects of climate change. Do I understand, when the issues come up? No. So I ask my friends, just like the alligator Alcatraz, which we've done a few episodes on here. Uh, one of the main complaints is obviously the environmental destruction of the Everglades. That's coming, that comes from that, and so the decision that came down from the court was based on expert testimony. And I sent it to my friend. I said before the show, I sent it to my friend who's an earth scientist. Was it NASA Goddard, and worked with NOAA on that. And so but I know what I want. I know I want economic justice. I know I don't want anybody discriminated against. Do I know the specifics of what's out there? Not all the time. Immigration's worse that way because there are so many little ways that they can scratch in and take away work permits and what that means, and there's little micro aggression that they can do against the immigrant population. So
Well, there's also actions that immigrants themselves take. Like I know you were mentioning before, with the DACA ruling, So yes, DACA recipients can renew every 2 years. But what I found in my study was a lot of times they lost time because they decided to put forward their application in a more secure moment, right? So maybe they put it in early and they lost 6 months in the process because they were so worried about it not being renewed that they decided to, hedge their bets and at least put it in, so they could have that extension of time. So it's every 2 years, except there's a game to it as well. I mean, there's a cost to it. They have to pay the renewal fees and that sort of thing. But they're also strategizing around other things, including moves, if they know they're going to be moving somewhere, even locally, but a different jurisdiction, that has implication, so it's an intentional process. And the way they talk about it is like living their life in this 2-year cycle that's really more like an 18-month cycle, right? So you get your approval, you're psychologically, you're in a good space because you know you're set for at least a while. But then as sort of that date gets closer and closer, new political uncertainties become clearer and clearer, you start having to think about staging your application and when it makes sense to put it in. And can I live with losing a couple of months if it means I at least get to stay here?
Yeah, we lost connection there for a second, but basically what you're saying is, and this works with a lot of applications, is that everything is timing, and then we don't know how long things are taking to renew, and I mean it kind of reminds me in some level of when people didn't know when these cases were going up about the Affordable Care Act, and for those of us that are have their health care covered by that, when we were holding our breath when the courts were deciding whether it was constitutional or not. And so that's kind of where DACA is in that
Well,
sense.
DACA there have been so many really, it's such a roller coaster that, even DACA recipients talk about, like, I had to check out. I can't be on this roller coaster anymore. It's too emotionally draining. It's too, and until there's like a certainty about what is actually going to happen to this program, like I just can't, so whereas people obsessively kind of followed twists and turns early on, they really kind of withdrew in terms of, as a mental health strategy too, right?
Well, it all comes down to Texas.
Hmm.
And sadly, DACA recipients today in Texas can keep their DACA, but they can't get work permits. Everywhere else they can. But
Well, and Texas has also gotten rid of Dreamer centers on university campuses, right? As part of, I mean, even before the broader attacks on DEI, that came with Trump 2.0, so that's been gone for a while. So the sites where people have undocumented and immigrant students, their safe spaces are no longer, and their resources are not there in the same way too.
And again, another point that I make that, I don't hear a lot. I consume a decent amount of media, not a lot of mainstream, but I consume a decent amount. But I know what people see in the real world, and I know that too many of the liberals that are, everybody's disgusted by Trump now. So we have for my purposes, it's great that everybody's there, but if you're going to be there, you're going to hear some reality here. And one of the realities is don't. When my person's moving in and out of Texas or in Tennessee or these different states, and it's like, Texas had a vote on a sanctuary vote, and or in the state or cooperating with the police. So I forgot exactly what the vote was, but San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, El Paso, and Austin all voted well, but then they were outvoted by the rest of the state. And not that there aren't other places around the rest of the state that people are organizing and being in community. So it's not their fault that these state lines are drawn the way they are. And it is not the people of West Virginia's fault that are advocating fault that they don't get a Baltimore. Because Maryland without Baltimore and Montgomery, a couple of counties, would be that. And so there are people in all of these places that are fighting. There are people in the Carolinas that are fighting. There are people in Mississippi that are fighting, and there are immigrant rights, people in all those universities. And so I think when we talk about states, we're talking about the control of state governments that can be really corrupt. And thankfully in Maryland, the majority of state legislators that are elected do come from areas where there's enough of an immigrant population and enough people that want to do the right thing. So that's the thing. And you have colleagues at those universities that are great, and it's a matter of like supporting them. And we don't mean that to dump on them. We mean that to say, look, this is something that they should be, platformed, advocated, and they're just being, they're being held hostage locally. We're being held hostage nationally in a sense. So what are the things? Okay, so you had these international students now coming across. So I remember in 2020 we were talking to students, about during the pandemic when Trump was saying, well, why do you have to keep your student visa if you're working remotely? Go to class. If you don't have a university that's open for classes, then go home, and you don't need a student visa. You don't need to live here, and you don't need a student visa because you could just be in Germany and log in. So
Yeah.
wait a minute, I live in China, and so that was
Yeah.
then. And so now is now. So what are the things that are facing the students now? What are
Yeah, well, some of those students had to defer, right, because they couldn't be in person because there were no in-person classes, so they experienced delays kind of in their timeline, their aspirational starting point. So now we see, even before Trump took office again, we were seeing a lot of issues with international students, just a lot of bureaucratic barriers, and financial barriers around the way they move kind of into university systems. So some of them, they have to take the TOEFL in order to gain admittance to US universities. If one of their scores is below threshold, then they're set on a pathway where they have to take an English language training class that is additional cost to them and to the department, to the units, not the university, where they get this particular kind of English language training. A lot of them talk about it being very discriminatory and a very negative experience too. So that, there's additional costs associated with it. There's kind of mistreatment. And that's the moment when they're onboarding here, so they've just come to the United States. This is their first sort of experience in US classrooms in some cases, right? It also puts them off track. So when they're taking the English language training classes, they're not able to take a normal load. So our master's students aren't able to finish in the normal projected timeline. So there's a lot of challenges associated with that. Also just advisement and that sort of thing. So there were already a lot of international student challenges bubbling up. I've been director of graduate studies since 2019. My first year or two, other than international students having to defer, there weren't a lot of distinctions between the issues they faced and the issues that our domestic students faced. But that's changed dramatically. And so now, they're facing a lot of the precarity that undocumented students and those with temporary status have faced, right? Is my renewal going to come through? Am I going to be able to, in their case, go back home and actually make it back into the United States? Even if I am theoretically have a visa that enables me to, right? For their renewals, it's, am I going to be able to get a visa appointment in time to maintain my student status, right? Because there's delays in people being able to get appointments.
and then worry about getting back in. What's that worry?
Just that they won't be able to get back in, right? And I mean, they talk about similar kind of, mistreatment and encounters with customs and border protection officers as they're entering too. But just that their visas won't be recognized, right? Or regarded to be valid. So there's just a lot of fears, I guess, and new fears for international students too. A lot of our international students, my field is anthropology. We do extended field work in many cases abroad. So a lot of these students are concerned about their ability to carry out a central piece of their getting a dissertation done, right, which is doing field work. So their ability to come and go. And previously that wasn't a concern. Some of them are attending international conferences too. And, these days I'm with everybody, all of my international students saying like, can you just let me know that you got back safely? Can you send me a note like on my personal email and let me know that you made it back? Because we just have, worries about what might happen to them. And then most recently, there's the proposed rule to eliminate the duration of status for international students, which is essentially trying to cap the amount of time international students can be here to 4 years. The average time to degree for just a PhD is 6.7 years. So that is shy of the amount of time they actually need to get their degree done. And so the implications of that, it's still the comment period for the rule has just closed. So it's still uncertain how that's going to roll out. So it's a lot of stress for international students. It's also a lot of confusion for those of us who wear administrative hats too, because we don't honestly know what the best advice is for each of these students. And it depends on how far into their program of study they are, a whole range of variables. Frankly, the International Student Scholar Office doesn't have all the answers to all of these what ifs and contingencies that are emerging. So international students, in our graduate school have become a real focal point because of a range of issues and changes that are impacting them very deeply.
And certainly people that come from different countries. I know there was a case recently in LSU, and they were trying to remove two Iranian students. I don't know all the facts of the case. They were stopped, but they're certainly going to the loyalty questions that people are asked are going to focus. If you've got a Palestinian student, you might get a little more, or a Iranian student, or possibly
So
Chinese student.
everybody is, removing anything potentially objectionable from their social media, except they can go and find it anyway. But it also has, implications on their scholarship. Like I have, in a couple of different ways, people are concerned. Those who are in any status other than citizen and international scholars are wondering if they can publish on their research, if it's at all critical of the administration, right? So it's yes, monitoring of social media and that sort of thing, but and that's what they need to do in order to get jobs, right? And maintain jobs and get promotions here in the United States. So, I had someone ask me the other day, can I publish under a pseudonym, for the next few years and ideally, regularize it in the future. So there's just so many, a wide range of issues, including, of course, the deep, sort of mental health impact on them, and sort of economic insecurity. They also have limitations on their ability to work. International students do, so they can't just pick up another job to make up, some application fees that they have to pay or whatever it is. So there's just a lot going on for international.
On top of a very rigorous curriculum, getting graduate degrees,
Staying focused
all
on their
that.
coursework.
And what you're saying, for those, again, and again, this is not anybody's critical, because what do we know? Because what's really reported, and we really do have a saturated, but also such a limited media. But it reminds me, people who I don't know, see the Trumbo movie, see something from the 50s if you haven't read or forget. But in the 50s, that's what people did. People, directors in Hollywood, writers, scholars use pseudonyms. There is a historical, when we talk about, when people say, and this is one thing, that this, podcast is hoping to dispel, is when people say, well, wow, this is un-American, or no, it's actually a playbook that is, that they are using. They're not original. This is not an original. This is a playbook. And in the 50s, they were, people did that. People were shuttered out of universities and sent out. And this is why, interestingly, yesterday, Judge Young out of Washington, the DC Circuit, meaning, and covers all the government policies and regulations, issued a 160-page decision. And no, I have not read it, which heavily criticized, critiqued, and linked this behavior of the Trump administration of allowing for the firing of university professors who express views that are in support of the Palestinian people. And that is, so that's, where that is heading. And so these are the issues that are facing us. These are certainly a lot of things that are moving in both directions, both with the DACA and with the students that you have. And we will certainly be revisiting. We're going to do sort of a series on students and academics around the country, and we'll see it's sort of burgeoning. So this has been really helpful, to get this update, to see where you are. I hope the rest of the semester goes well.
And I'd be happy to come again and give further updates on.
Oh, no, absolutely. Oh, no, that's an invitation we won't reject here.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to before I thank you, I want to thank again, Jeff Barsky and Insect Factory for giving us the music, and also Stephanie Buatois for her super producing of the podcast. And Chrissy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we'll be talking soon. Take care.
Good.
All right, bye-bye.